Well, even though Joe Biden has not officially declared his candidacy to run as the Democratic Party standard bearer in 2024, that hasn't stopped planning by party officials to make certain things happen, set certain things in motion, and more importantly, make the decision about where it is that the national convention will be held. Recently, the DNC has announced where it is that they will be holding their national convention in the election year of 2024, and the choice wound up surprising people. Turns out the Democrats are going back to a very familiar haunt. The DNC has made the decision to host the Democratic National Convention for 2024 in Chicago, Illinois. Now, this choice surprised people, and I'm not going to lie, it surprised your favorite front porch conservative. On the other hand, it didn't surprise me either. Not surprised, surprised, a lot to get into. Oh, let's just dispense with all this. Let's just start talking about it. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. Now, as I said a moment ago, when the DNC announced their decision on where it was that they were going to hold their national convention in 2024, a lot of people were surprised, including me, because, let's be honest, there are some issues about this choice that are definitely worth taking a long, hard look at, and you'd be a little bit surprised if Democrats didn't do that. On the other hand, I'm not necessarily surprised by the choice either, and I'll tell you why. You got to stop and think about it. The Democrats have held the National Convention in Chicago in 1968. About 28 years later, they held it again in 1996 in Chicago, and now they're going to hold it again 28 years later in 2024 in Chicago. Give the Democratic Party this: they're nothing if not consistent. Now, there are advantages to holding this convention in Chicago. Number one, they've been there, they've done that. They know what this city has to offer. And when I say has to offer, you got to remember something. People aren't necessarily always going to these conventions to be, holed up in a convention hall for 3 or 4 days, making major decisions. Most of this stuff is already worked out long before the convention ever takes place. As a matter of fact, in the minds of most people, and truthfully, it is the case, political conventions are more about theater and messaging these days. The conventions have lost their power as far as deciding who the nominee is going to be at the convention itself. With the introduction of delegate voting and superdelegate voting, particularly for the Democrats, a lot of that decision making has gone out of it. The fireworks, everything else that old conventions used to be known for, those days are more or less gone. So the Democratic Party knows what they're getting in Chicago. And what I was alluding to a moment ago when I say they know what they're getting, not only do they know what the convention is going to be like, they also know what the amenities in the city are going to be like. People can go to good restaurants, they can see certain sites, etc. So they know what they're getting. I'm also not surprised by the fact that the Democrats chose Chicago because, let's be honest, it's Chicago. Everybody knows this is an absolutely, almost completely unanimous, lockdown, controlled area by Democrat politicians. How much so, in fact? I read an article today in Reason Magazine. It pointed out some statistics I wasn't aware of. I had a feeling they were the case, but I didn't know the actual numbers. The Democrats have had a lock on the mayor's office in Chicago for going on 95 years. There are 50 seats on the city council in the city of Chicago. There's not a single Republican city council member in Chicago. There are 17 seats on the Cook County Commission. 16 of them are controlled by Democrats. So if you're going to decide to put a national convention somewhere, Putting it in Chicago is a safe bet. You're not necessarily going to have to worry about some local Republican politician making a whole lot of hay. Unless, of course, you're talking about maybe a state rep or a state senator. But the Democrats are going to have that area locked down so tight, all the TV cameras are going to be pointed at their people. They're not going to be pointed at the Republicans. Now, that also gets to something else. You know that you'll be able to control the area, you'll be able to control the messaging. And finally, I'm not surprised by the fact that the Democrats are holding the convention in Chicago because of the Obama factor. No, Barack Obama is not on the ticket this year. And no, contrary to hope and prayer and rumor, Michelle Obama is not going to be on the ticket this year. I'm sorry, Roger Stone, but I just don't agree with you on this one. Michelle Obama has no desire to run for the presidency. She's not going to do it. But there is one advantage to the Democrats in having the convention in Chicago, is that you can milk that, nostalgia factor for all it's worth. Obama was, before Biden, the last democratically elected president, and he is a Chicago man through and through. So yeah, I'm not necessarily surprised for all those reasons, and probably many, many more, that the Democrats picked Chicago. On the other hand, like a lot of people, I am surprised, and we'll get into that in just a minute. Now, as I said at the very beginning of the video, when the choice was made by the Democrats to hold the 2024 convention in Chicago, a lot of people were surprised, me being one of them. Now, the reason for my surprise is I was surprised that Democrat Party officials would be willing to pick Chicago because of its past and because of its present. Now, for those of you who may be younger who are watching this channel and you hear me say it's past, you don't know what I'm referring to, let me take you down memory lane. When the Democrats held the National Convention in Chicago in 1968, that year particularly was a pivotal year socially and politically for the United States. Socially, in that it was at the height of the Vietnam War and the anti-war movement. And there was a huge schism in the Democratic Party between, war hawks like LBJ and doves like Bobby Kennedy, who had been assassinated 2 months before the convention. Now, and on top of that, you had the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. So the convention in 68 in Chicago was absolutely wild. Now, the upshot of it was the convention was held August 26, 29 of 1968. In the end, when it was all said and done, the ticket of Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota and Edward Muskie of Maine were put together to try to defeat Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew. That's what the end result was. What everybody remembers the 68 convention for is a lot of police violence, a lot of protesting, a lot of heavy-handed tactics by the mayor, the late Richard J. Daley. They remember barbed wire around the convention center. They remember floor fights. They remember people like Walter Cronkite of CBS News absolutely criticizing the Democrats for the way the convention was being run and the heavy-handed security tactics. There were reporters from like NBC News. I remember John Chancellor being literally taken off the floor. It was absolute bedlam in Chicago that year. And needless to say, they did not need that coming out of the convention, because in an ideal situation, what you want a situation where the party is united, and then you roll into the election year in November and you've got your best foot forward. They most certainly did not get that in 1968. Now, you say Chicago to the right Democrat of a certain generation, and they'll still go, ooh, because they have memories of this. So I am a little bit surprised they picked this. Now, you could make an argument that the convention of 96 and the easy re-election of Bill Clinton over Bob Dole takes away some of that sting. But to go back to Chicago, even all these years separated from what happened in 1968, is still going to bring some of that up, especially when you couple the past with the present. Chicago right now is the absolute poster child for everything wrong with Democrats who run big city governments. You've got pensions that are underfunded, you've got crime in the streets, you've got populations leaving, you've got businesses leaving. They just elected a communist, progressive Democrat in the mold of Lori Lightfoot, which is the mayor that they kicked out after her first term. You are absolutely, if you're the Democrats, you are opening the door for the Republicans to absolutely pound that message home. It's badly run city. It's a badly run city run by Democrats, and absolutely you can't let this be done in Chicago all over the entire nation. Right now the Democrats are on a bad footing with people on the issue of law and order and crime in general. And now you're going to put your national convention in the city that is the poster child for all those things? Like I said, there are arguments to be made for putting the convention in Chicago, but in light of the way Chicago is being run right now, I'm really shocked that they put it there. Now, all of that said, believe me, the Democrats are going to make sure that the area around the convention is absolutely cleaned up. You won't see homeless people. The streets are going to be scrubbed. There will be heavy police presence, or at least some measure of police presence, even though they don't have much of a police force anymore. But my point is, they're going to do everything they can to make sure that when the TV cameras are rolling in and out of the convention center, it looks like a utopia. This is just ideal, what you want with Democrats running city government, where the reality is everybody knows that's not the case. Now, that also brings up the last reason that I'm surprised that the Democrats are holding the convention in Chicago. And it's what I call the life will find a way factor. If you remember the original Jurassic Park movie, Jeff Goldblum played a character, a scientist, and the owners and the proponents of Jurassic Park were explaining how everything was under control and nothing random could happen. Nothing of chance would ever happen at Jurassic Park. And one of my favorite lines from that movie is from Jeff Goldblum when he says, "Life will find a way." Now, for all the Democrats' planning, for all the Democrats' control mechanisms, for all of the lockdown measures that they're going to do in and around the convention center, there is always the possibility that something so random, so unplanned for, could happen that absolutely blows up everything they've planned for and everything they've put in place. And that thing could wind up being the image and the message that comes out of the convention, as opposed to we're united behind our nominee, we're behind Joe Biden, assuming, of course, he's the nominee, and everything is hunky-dory for we Democrats. Like I say, there's a lot of reasons for the surprise. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be a really interesting ride between now and the summer of 2024. But what do you think about it? As we start to wrap this up, please do me some favors as always. Number one, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please do so. Number two, hit the bell for notifications. We want to make sure you're always aware when a new video is going up. Number three, if you have friends that you think would enjoy this content, please make it a point to share the video with them. I'll take all the help I can get spreading the word around about the electronic front porch. And finally, please hit the thumbs up button. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative, and I'll see you next time.